Hi, my name's Rick from Marriott Models. We're a DJI dealer from the UK, and this is our construction video of the new F450 Flamewheel powered by the new E300 propulsion system. Right, we'll just take a look inside the box. Now, with all our Flamewheel packages, you'll get a paper guide, and on this you'll have things like links to the DJI website so you can download the manual, a whole pile of do's and don'ts, links to the various Facebook groups, RC groups, etc., and of course all of our support details there, including the email support number, which goes up to 10:30 at night, 7 days a week. On the flip side of it, we also have extract for the CAA Air Navigation Order. This just gives you basic guidelines on where and where not to fly your small UAV aircraft, so definitely worth a look. It doesn't just apply to people that do it commercially, it applies to all of us, hobbyists included. Now, one of the main differences between this and the previous F450 kit is this one comes with the E300 propulsion system. The main differences is that it's a more efficient system. DJI claim that it will be about 15 to 20% more efficient. One of the main differences is the motors and the speed controllers. Now, if I just open this packet up, the motors are actually all marked. You can see on that one it's actually marked clockwise because you get 2 clockwise and 2 counterclockwise motors. The motors are actually marked on the sides of the cans as well. I don't know if you can see that. You get the wee markers to tell you which way it's going to go, and these will correspond with a propeller. Now, to identify the motor to the prop, you'll notice on the top of the motor, just twist that around, there's a wee dimple in it. Now you have a black motor and a silver motor. Now colour wise they're all the same, but the one with the dimple in it is a black motor, so that goes with a black prop. Now these are all self-tightening, so it's like the DJI Phantom 2, the later Phantom 1s, the Vision and the Vision Plus. You actually have a self-tightening propeller. So unlike the original Flamewheel, where you could just basically mount any motor on any arm and then later on just put the corresponding prop onto the motor, with this one, because the motors are handed to the props or matched to the props, you really need to sort this out right at the start. Now it's all self-tightening, so you just place it on and basically just spin it down backwards. You don't need to tighten it up because when the motor rotates, it automatically keeps the prop tight. In fact, it's a good idea not to tighten them up, because if you store your Flamewheel in a box that you need to take the props off, you just simply spin the prop the other way and basically off it comes. Now, as the construction is ever so slightly different from the normal Flamewheel, the best thing to do is to lay all your motors and propellers out first. So basically we have, there's that one, and then we have a counterclockwise one. Now on the top of the counterclockwise propeller there's no dimple, and that basically means that it corresponds to a silver hubbed prop. So that basically just go on like that. Again, just spin it down, no tightening required. We have another one. So dimple, black hub prop. There we go. Now, the reason I put these on first is it does make life a bit easier for identification later on. Now, the other thing to look at is the new speed controllers. Now, the main difference with these is these are actually 15 amp speedos. Because the propulsion unit is so much more efficient, it doesn't require the same amount of juice out of the speedos. Now, the odd thing is the speedos are actually the same size as the older opto speed controllers, which were 30 amp. The main difference is that where before you had 2 power cables coming out of the speed controller, this has a single coaxial cable with basically like that. I think it may be just to do with like maybe suppression. It might be a bit simpler. The Phantom 2 speeders are done exactly the same way. You've got like a single cable and then it splits into two at the end. So that's one of the other sort of main differences. But I'll put these aside for now because we're not going to need these just yet. Now the kit is supplied with two sets of arms. So you've got red arms, which generally the way that DJI do it is these are the front. And you get two white arms. Now, the best way of going around doing this is actually, where before you'd literally just whacked 4 motors onto 4 arms, I actually find it's probably better now to actually figure out the motors going on the correct arms before you start, because it's like anything, you have 2 motors will go clockwise and 2 motors will go counterclockwise. Now before I start building, I'll just go over a few required items or tools that will make life a lot easier for you. First thing of course that's important is you will be soldering, is you need a soldering iron. A 40-watt soldering iron will be more than enough for this job, but if you don't have a decent soldering iron, either get somebody to solder it for you or go and pick one up. You can pick them up out of Maplin, places like that for very reasonable prices. Definitely worth getting a good one. Of course you'll need some good multi-core solder, so pick up some of that. You'll also need tie wraps. I tend to go for like white and red tie wraps just because I like the tie wraps to match against the arms as best as possible. Just looks really good if you're building quadcopters for customers, just gives it a bit of bling. You will require one battery connection for going onto the main distribution board. I tend to use the XT60. Seems to be something that DJI have been using for a while, but it is actually a really good connection. So you can use any other ones like Dean's, EC3s, whatever basically your batteries have got on it. You will require one of them. They don't come with the kit. Of course, important is a driver. You'll need basically a 2mm hex driver tool. It's worth picking this up. These are quite common throughout the DJI range. The Phantom is entirely assembled out of screws that use this driver, so it's worth getting one. If you get one with a machine tip as well, it'll last a lot longer. So very handy tool. Snips are just handy for things like trimming your tie wraps, etc. Scalpel knife, handy for just paring wires back for soldering or cutting, etc. Lastly, you don't need this because use multi-core solder, but I find using a flux pen a very handy thing. It just improves the adhesion of the solder. Sometimes if you have to heat your solder for too long, you can burn the flux off. It all goes a bit matte and dry and stringy. Basically dab some of that on. If you're going to be doing a bit of soldering, worth picking one up. They're not overly cheap, but definitely well worth it, and they last for absolutely ages. Now in this particular package, this is one of the most popular packages we do, and this will come with the DJI Naza Lite flight controller. We'll come back to this when we start on the soldering. The set also includes a set of the DJI extended undercarriage. These are handy things to have. It just lifts the body of the quadcopter off the ground and just basically just stops the belly of the model just sitting in the grass if you're on grass or if you're in rough terrain. Or in fact, if you've actually fitted a gimbal on, it'll help take care of that as well. Other parts of the kit, of course, you get is the main distribution boards. There's 2 of these in here. You've got an upper and lower deck. Just pull them out. So you have the lower deck. Now this has it's an integrated circuit board, so you'll basically be soldering your speed controllers onto here, and the battery connection will be going onto here. It keeps everything really nice and clean. So that's the lower side of it, that is the top side of it, and this is where the arms will attach to. That's your upper deck. Nothing fancy on that, just an upper deck. Again, that's where the arms will be screwing onto. Of course, you get 2 bags of screws, 2 different sizes. These 2 different ones will basically be, well, one does the Flamewheel's arms and one does the Flamewheel's motors. So I have 2 packs of those. And finally, into this little accessory pack, you get a set of double-sided Velcro. That's basically for sticking the battery onto the top deck. You do also get a Velcro strap there for holding the battery on. So between the two of them, they keep the battery on nice and secure, especially if you're running something like a 5 amp battery, which is quite big. And of course you get your, that's basically the power connection, which is where your battery connection will come into. That'll be getting soldered onto that. And you've got a tool, although you don't really need this tool, but maybe if you have a bit of a bump or a tip over and the propellers tighten right up, you can use that, basically that tool for gripping the motor. Don't use pliers on your motors, they are made of aluminium and you will destroy them. And you just hook that on, turn the prop back against its rotation, and it will just pop straight off. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to mount the motors onto the arms. So we're also going to need a screwdriver. I'll start with the front arm, so I'll move them all out of the way. And these out of the way. We won't be needing these just now. So now the way it works with on DJI, they number all the motors, and the way it basically works is this is motor 1, this is motor 2, and then back here you'll have your white arms with motor 3 and motor 4. Now the motors on the DJI are handed in rotation. Now I don't know if you'll be able to see this properly, but if I show you this little diagram on my phone, just lift it up there, you'll see basically which way they're meant to rotate. So you can see the two front motors are like turning in on themselves. Now this is exactly the same as on the DJI Phantom. So as I was saying earlier about, it's best to have your motors already mounted on the propellers. It makes it a lot easier to see which props are going to go onto which arms. So if I kind of push these out to the way here, move these forward, that motor will be going on that arm, that's a silver motor, and you'll be having a black motor going on that arm, and then the way it would work is you would have a silver motor back here and you would have a black motor back there. But I just find it easier just to mount the motors onto the arms just now, and then you know exactly where you're going. Right, okay, best way to mount these on, if you basically take the Flamewheel arm, I find mount the screw onto the driver and then just basically poke it through, get your motor and then line it up to the screw and just slowly turn it. Now don't tighten it up at this point, just kind of nick it up because we'll need to move it around for the next screw. Just basically look through there and then pop it on, line it up and then drive that one in, and then that one you could just tighten up a bit. And with the next one, that's that one tight. Then pop in the next screws and then tighten that up. There we go. And then we've got the first one rotating inward, which is the correct direction. Right, next one we will do is the other one. I'll not show you them all going together because they all go in together exactly the same way, so just pop your screw on there, then the motor, just put that through, line it up with the motor, hold this set locked in, oops, back out again, and then just put the driver in. As I say, just nick it up, don't tighten it up. Then you can basically just manoeuvre the arm so you can see through and then pop the other screw in. And as I say, on that one, because now you've got all the screws lined up, you can't actually tighten them up. Just popping in the other screws, whoops, and pop that one in there, and then pop that one in there, and then you have the first two done. So they'll sit like that on the flame wheel, and you have your two motors turning in. The good thing is now at this point, you know you've got your first two ones with the motors turning in the correct direction. Okay, for this bit I've actually zoomed the camera in a bit, it'll just make it a little bit easier for you to see. So the first thing we need to start with is the bottom deck. Now, as I said earlier, I do use a flux pen, just improves the adhesion. So just give me a dab of that on each plate. As I say, if you haven't got this, it doesn't really matter, but just gives you a bit extra stick. And now we're just going to tin the bottom deck. So that'll be clean before we start. Just clean tip. You just tin on some dod, a nice wee ball like that, covering the brass plate, like that. More solder, fry my hands. There we go. There we go. And you get little balls like that, they just wipe off, no problem there. And that's basically that, ready to take the power cable and the motors. Now, speed controllers. Now, one thing I'm just going to show you now in regards to the speed controllers. Now, as I say, these speedos were a little bit different from the earlier ones. Now, one of the other things is I've noticed is that the cable that comes on them is, to be honest with it, is a bit on the long side. Now, you can either just go with as it is, or you can cut it down just to make it a bit neater, because if you look at what you're going to need, if I basically place, I get this in camera shot, if you place that on there, and then if you think the speed controller is going to sit probably about there, as you can see, you just end up with cable coiled all over the place. So what we tend to do now is, now these cables on the motor will be, say, tucking down in here, and then they'll be going like that, and then they'll be going along the back of the leg like that. So the motor will be rough, speed control will be roughly about there. So if I place that next to the board, it's going to go to there. So I would probably say we can pretty safely cut the coaxial cable down by there. So if I just nip that there, and then you can obviously, if you've got cable strippers and stuff, you can use those. I just tend to use a knife. Now I'm going to strip this back a little bit further than is needed, and I will basically show you why that is. Just pull that back like that, and then just kind of pare back. So I'm just you can obviously, if you've got cable strippers and stuff, you can use those. I just tend to use a knife. Now I'm going to strip this back a little bit further than is needed, and I will basically show you why that is. Just pull that back like that. Move it all to the side. It's just using like a small sort of sharp screwdriver, and then just getting in there and just teasing it out. Just pull that out there. Just work your way back down the braids of the cable until we should end up with them pretty all unravelled. And we can just pick that bit out like that, and then just pull them all to the side like that. and just twist that round like that to coil them up, and then just pare that back slightly, and basically that, like the others, is ready for soldering, trimming and cutting. Right, so you want to basically end up with a connection looking a bit like that. So when it goes on, it can go on like that. So what we need to do, if we just pare back that bit there, roll that, so that's one bit, and then if we tin those just now, tin there. Now on this one I'm going to tin the whole thing, but we're actually going to trim that down. It just doesn't need to be as long as that back there, because obviously that's all exposed cable, so we want to keep that to a minimum. So we're going to cut that down, say by about that, and then the plan is you're going to end up putting it on like that. I will say the new propulsion system, it is a little bit more awkward to solder on and fit than the older system. Obviously DJI felt they need to do this. Why they have, I'm not entirely sure. But with the twin wires that they had before, it was basically easier. So obviously looking at positive and negative, obviously positive to the red wire. Get this the wrong way around and you will blow your lower deck, and they're not cheap, so best get it right first time round. So if I just basically heat a bit of that and just heat the job, then the cable, in she goes. And then again with that one, heat the job and the cable, and in she goes. So there's basically that one all nicely done. If I hold that up to you, that one's already going on, so no problems there. Now before soldering on the power cables, the best thing to do is actually to mount the battery connector onto the supplied power cable. Just move that to the side and then bring in our helping hands. Best thing to do is just clamp the cables in like that, shove it in the jaws, pull them apart a bit, and then we can tin the wire first. It does come pre-tinned, but always a good idea to go over it again. There we go. That. And then we need to pre-solder the battery connection itself. There we go, tin in there, and that down in there, like that. Now just to watch out for, all battery connections have a positive and negative, and generally if you look on the side you will see there, oops, wrong way, that is the positive. So again, get this wrong and you will blow your distribution board. So let's put this back into shot again. And just solder that on. Job up, and the cable, in she goes. Wee blow there, and that's that. Swing that around so I can do the other side. So it's a wee bit awkward to try and do it for me, and so you can see. So let's get that job up, and then in it goes. We blow just to cool it off. Now what we need to do is, to finish this off properly, is to just slide some heat shrink over the top. If you've bought a pack of XT connections, normally this heat shrink will come with it. If you get the right size, it will actually slip over the connector and actually go down into the body. Now at this point, absolutely ideal if you have a heat gun. Fortunately I don't, so I'm just going to use the edge of my soldering iron just to shrink these bits of cable down. But ideally a heat gun would get it right down. It should be ideal, but I haven't got one. Just Like that, just watch the connector, and then that is basically that part done. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on in the main differences between the Naza Lite and the Naza V2 is to do with the expandability. Now, the Naza V2 has the PMU unit for powering the main flight controller, but one of the other main differences is that it has the CAN bus connections in it, and this is what makes it a bit more different from the Lite, which doesn't have these. Now, what these are for is for connecting in other DJI specific parts like the Zemu's gimbal, the iOS-D mini on-screen display, things like that, the 2.4 gig data uplink ground station, all plug into these ports because this port basically relays information and power to all these accessories. The Lite doesn't have these, so for example, if you've got a Lite and you want to fit things like gimbals onto them, you have to use aftermarket products rather than the actual DJI branded one. So that's one of the main differences. There are other differences in the software that you use to update the flight controller. There's a little bit more going on, but the Naza Lite is still a very good controller. It is a lot cheaper and still probably our most popular one, but just something to keep in mind if you're thinking about expansion later on. Just think how you're going to expand your Flamewheel. Okay, now that you've got your speed controllers soldered onto the distribution board, the next stage is now to fit the LED power unit. Now you have a choice whether you're using the Naza V2 or the Naza Lite flight controller. This is the Naza Lite LED power unit in one. So that's a small LED indicator that will give you all your sort of flight status, etc. Now on the Naza V2 it's done slightly different. This is the PMU, which is basically the power management unit. It has a separate LED module on the Naza V2 which plugs directly into the flight controller. So depending on which one you'll be fitting, it would depend on which one you'd be soldering on. So if you're going to be using the Naza V2, you'll be using the PMU unit, which will get soldered onto there along with the battery connection. And if you're using the Naza Lite, you'll be using the combined PMU and LED unit, and again that will be getting soldered on along there along with the main battery connection. Now we're ready to solder on the main battery power connector and the Naza Lite LED module onto the main distribution board. Now just as a little tip, I find it easy because you're trying to attach two wires and holding a soldering iron at the same time. I find it easy if you just attach two of the wires with a bit of insulation tape just to hold them in place, so that way you can hold on to the cable and your soldering iron at the same time. It just blends in nicely there. And the other one. Now if you need to add a little bit of solder onto this, then do so. I think in this case, yeah, see we're probably a little bit short of solder, so what I'm going to do, as I've now tacked it in place, I can just heat the job back up and just get some extra solder on there, and we get a nice chrome ball there. And now you can remove the insulation tape. Now what you can do as well for a bit of safety, as you have an awful lot of exposed battery connections, which you can imagine if you touch something across the metal, then it would cause a catastrophic short and it'll be the end of your multi-rotor. A couple of things you can do, a couple of products that are available, is either you can get liquid electrical tape, which is just like a black goo you just daub on top of the connections, or ideally black, basically some insulation tape, basically just cut to size, can be stuck over the terminals, basically like that. Obviously you would use black because it would look a lot better, but just a little bit of tape trimmed to size over the connection, and that way if something touched on it, it wouldn't be a problem. So I'll just remove that now because I will come back to that at a later point. So we're going to need our 2mm Allen driver. and we'll attach the first arm. So this is the front right arm. Now if we just screw this up, but don't tighten it fully. You'll feel resistance as the screw goes in because there's actually thread lock built into all the screws. So I just go tight and then I back it off. Reason is it just makes it a little bit easier to get the other screw lined up and get it in there. And then this one can be tightened the whole way. And then we just retighten the other screw. And that is the front right hand motor arm fitted with the silver prop center. Okay, now that we have the two front arms on, one thing to watch out for when you're assembling your speed controllers, remember to pass the power cable for the speed controller through the gap before you bolt on the arm, otherwise you won't be able to get that through because they need to actually run off the board and through, and then these will be getting tie wrapped onto the back of the arms. So now I will fit the rear arms on. Now remembering your direction of your motor, so for example you have the silver dot front right motor there, so the corresponding arm at the rear would also have a silver dot on it, so that goes diagonally to the rear. So as I said before, just remember to have the cable in the center here and then mount your arm over the top there. Okay, that's us now got all the arms all now fitted, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start tidying up the cabling. The motor's going to be mounted probably in about the middle there, so basically we just pop a tie wrap on. Now don't go mad with your tie wraps, you just literally want to have them snug. If you ramp them up too tight, then it can obviously start distorting bits inside the actual, turn that around, you'll see it better, inside the actual speed controller. So you can just basically just pull that in, so that's basically looking a bit snugger, and then flip that over, you've got your motor connections. Now until you run the motors, you don't know whether your motors are actually going to run in the right direction, but the only way we can check that out is to actually run them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pop all the motor connections in, but if you find that when you eventually go into the Naza Assistant and actually check your motors are actually running in the right direction, if they're not running in the right direction, you just simply have to swap over two of these wires. It doesn't matter which ones, these motors run on AC, so you just swap two of them over until it is going in the right direction. Totally important that they are running in the right direction, or your flywheel will just basically try and suck itself into the ground. Okay, now that we have all the speed controllers mounted, it's now time to mount the actual LED unit. Just put that over like that. This is your LED unit. I tend to mount this at the back on one of the rear legs. The idea being it's similar to how the Phantom's got its warning light, which is mounted on the rear. So when you're flying away from yourself, which you generally do, and you're looking at the rear of the model, you'll see the LED indicating light there. Now the best way to mount this, I find, using one of the sticky pads that are actually included along with the flight controller. You get a larger square pad but the centre knocks out. I find this is ideal for mounting the LED module onto the arm. So if we just put a little bit of that on the back of the arm, push it in, and then basically fit this at the sort of broader section of the arm. Just push that on there like that, and then securing it in place with one of your larger tie wraps. So just put it on. That, just make sure that the tie wrap doesn't go over the LED module, and then you will be good to go. Okay, now that we've got all the motors, speed controllers, arms and LED module mounted, it's now time to fit the flight controller. In this particular instance, we're going to be using the Naza light flight controller. This is the part we're looking for. This is the main flight controller. Now the flight controllers, if you look closely, they have a small arrow on them. This refers to the direction they go in. The other way to look at it, if you look at it, it kind of slopes like a car. So obviously the lower part at the front is the front, and the arrow points to the front, so the flight controller goes in that direction. Now one other small thing to notice, you'll notice a fine line that runs through the centre of the flight controller. That is actually the centre line of the flight controller rather than the actual middle of the unit. Although it's only off ever so slightly, it's just if you want to tick all the boxes, we are going to be lining it up using that line there. Now, multi-rotors have a balance point in them, just like a model aircraft, which is basically right in the middle. So if you can have imaginarily line that way and imaginarily line that way, and that is what we're going to align that arrow and that line with. Now, if you go into your pack with the flight controller, you'll find the sticky pads. So the first thing we do is just pop the centre out of that one. That's the one you used to stick on the LED module earlier. And then we just peel off the backing and stick this onto the flight controller. Now that it's ready to go in, the way to actually look at it, if you look at the sort of lines on the base plate, so that line there would be the centre line of this line here. So if we just peel that back and then do your absolute best to line this up correctly. Just make sure you haven't got any cables under the flight controller, and that will stop it sticking down properly. So that's pretty much right on bang in the centre, and the arrow is pretty much centred along there. So we'll just push that down, and that's it, firmly mounted. Now that we've got the flight controller mounted, we're now ready to connect into the motors. Now, as I said earlier, each motor has a number, and that corresponds to the numbers on the flight controller. So we've got M1 through to 6, F1, F2. Now F1 and F2, they're for aftermarket gimbal controls, we won't be using those, and M5 and M6 are for the F550, which is a hexacopter, we won't be using those. So it's just a simple case of plugging each motor into the flight controller. Now, as I said before, they're numbered, so if you remember, silver dotted propeller, this is motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, motor 4, and that corresponds with here, M1, 2, 3 and 4. Now if you look closely at the connector, there's a small notch in the connector. That corresponds, if you look closely at the flight controller, you'll see notches all along the bottom. That is so you plug the connector in the right way around. So the first thing to do, we'll just plug in M1, that's in, and then we take M2, plug that in, and then M3, plug that in, and lastly M4, we plug that in. Okay, now that we've got the motors all connected, it's now time to look at the rear of the flight controller, and we have some more connections. Now, move that out of the way. They are marked with an A, E, T, R, U. What these stand for is aircraft control. So you've got A for aileron, that's the banking of the model. You've got E for elevator, that controls the pitch. You've got throttle, which is obviously your throttle. You've got R, which is for rudder, that's the yaw of the model. The U, this is for selecting the various GPS functions on your transmitter or onto the flight controller. So we'll come back to those. And then we have X3, and that is for a connector on the LED unit to plug into. Now Now the flight controller is supplied with a big bunch of these connections. These are actually your receiver connections. Now you have quite a few of them because it covers all of the channels along the back, but depending on what configuration you using, it would depend on how many that you'll be using. So what we really need, all we need to do is, again, you've got the wee key on the connector and you've got the key into the bottom of the flight controller. So it's just a case of plugging all these in along here, but what we'll be doing, we'll just be going from A through to U, because this particular build won't have a gimbal on it, so we won't need any of the other connections, but we will need the U channel, which is how we control the various GPS functions, but we'll come to that later on. So first, if I just plug in A, that's A in, and the next one, which is E, which is elevator. Now I'm just going to shoot to the end now. Okay, so I've jumped forward and I've connected all 5 receiver connectors from A through to U. Now the other 2 are inhabited by these. So the first one we have, if you notice out of the LED module, you'll have 2 connections. One is much bigger than the other, so you can't really get this the wrong way around. But the one that looks the same as the servo connections, that's that one, that plugs into X3. So I'll just plug that in. That's X3 connected. Now this one is the LED module, and you'll notice on the top of the flight controller, you'll see it marked LED, and that simply plugs in there. You can't get it the wrong way around because it's got key connections on there as well. And that's that all connected. Okay, now just to finish things off, I've tidied all the cables up. So basically just using some spare tie wraps, you can tidy your cables up. You can kind of roughly see where I've put a lot of the cables. These ones here, which are the servo ones, I've just left loose because obviously they'll be getting tucked away when we actually install the receiver on a later part of this video. Now the next stage we do is to mount the top deck. Now there's a couple of different ways you can actually mount this deck on, whether you want the battery to be running in line with the model or running sideways on the model. The way I tend to do is I tend to do it running in line with the model. The reason is if you mount a gimbal onto the front of the model, it will make the model a little bit nose heavy. So I find that if you mount the battery in line with the model, you can slide the battery back and it will compensate for the weight. It does make it fly better, it makes it turn and rotate better. So for this video, I'll be mounting the deck that way. Now, back to our, these are the 2.5 by 5mm screws. Simply load up your screwdriver and then once again, just pop them in the hole and start screwing them down. Now what I tend to do is, as we haven't actually fully tested or fitted the receiver yet, I tend not to fit all the screws in. I tend to just put one in each arm, just so I can start working with it. Because if for any reason that you have to remove it again, it's easier to remove just 4 screws than it is all of the screws. So just pop all them in and then just work all your way around. Okay, next part is just to mount the Velcro tape. Now what I tend to do, if you pull your Velcro tape apart, you'll find it has like a fluffy part and a jaggy part. What I do tend to do is I tend to put the fluffy part on the battery. It just makes it a wee bit nicer to handle. So what to do is take the backing off, and that is basically going to go right in the center there. Push that on. And I basically just leave that backing on until I'm ready to mount the battery. Now if you are going to be mounting a gimbal at the front and you think you are going to have the battery hanging off the back, the best thing to do is to actually cut another small piece and basically just put it at the back there, and then that way if the battery is more towards the back, it's still, the back end won't like float about. But in this case we won't be, so I'm just going to leave that off. and then of course it's the Velcro strap, so that can basically just loop in under that, depending on the size of pack you've got. But as generally with the 450s, I don't tend to use anything bigger than about 5,000, so going through those holes is more than enough. Right, okay, next part I'm just going to mount the GPS module on. Oh, now I haven't put the top part of the GPS module on. The reason is that I can actually get the screwdriver straight down the side. If you do assemble all fully with the puck on, you can still get into it, but it's just not quite as easy than if the if the puck was already on it. You'd have to come in at a bit of an angle. So just put that one in as well. Now, while we're waiting for that shaft, I don't think that's quite, no, that's glued now. So what I'll do is, while we're working on the rest, again, tiny dot of super glue. This is quite thin super glue, so just put a wee dot in there. So, oops, leave it down the side there, like that. And then that basically just goes on the top like that. So we can just leave that to dry now. Now, coming back to the GPS puck, now it's quite important that the puck goes on the right way. I've seen so many people basically put these on backwards. Now if you look closely, it's quite simple. You'll see the arrow. That is the front going out that way. A lot of people think it would look better going that way with the cable coming out the back, which it would, but it actually does go on the other way. So just remember that when you come to basically sticking it on. Now basically it's just a case of plugging the GPS puck into the part. Well, you'll see the two connections. One's got the LED module already in it and the other one is open, so that basically just plugs in there. You might want to do this before you put the top deck on. It probably would have been a bit easier, but it's quite easy. That plugs in there. You've got all your servo connections all still out the back because that's where the receiver is going on, and you can either use Velcro to hold it on, a Velcro strap to hold it on. It's up to you. And then basically that is where that will be going on as soon as that is dry. Okay, that's me finished tidying up the GPS puck. So you see what I've done here. I've ran the GPS cable down the back of the shaft, just secured it with some tie wraps, coiled up there, attached it to the arm there with a tie wrap, another tie wrap there, and then of course basically plugged in. Now a lot of people ask on the internet what this is for. Now to be honest with you, it's not entirely clear. I believe what it is actually meant for is these little sticky stripes are meant for actually attaching that cable in, because they come off individually, and I think it's for attaching that. Other people say it's for sticking across there, so you've got a better line so you can make sure that that is straight or not. Honestly, I'm not really sure. I do not tend to use them, and I just tend to use my tie wraps on there. So that is basically your flame wheel now finished and assembled. The next step is basically installing the radio. Now there are lots of videos already on the internet in regards to installing the radio into flame wheels, because as you can imagine, every different computer radio set would have a different way of programming the menu to make it fit or work with the Naza light controller, so you can certainly check all those videos out. What I'll do, just for frame of reference, I'll do a second video and I will show you it with fitting in DJI's DT7 radio. Now the reason I'll use this one is because the DT7 radio, this is exactly the same transmitter you get in a Phantom, regardless of the version of it. It's the same DT7 2.4 gig radio. It's a CAN bus system, so it will plug into the X2 channel of the Naza light controller, so it's pretty much plug and play. There's no mucking about with endpoint adjustments as you would on a computerized radio. You literally just plug it in, calibrate the radio, and it's ready to go. So what I'll do is I'll do a second video showing the setting up of the Naza controller, setting up things like the puck position. These are all things that have to be done before you can fly your Flamewheel. And of course, more importantly, making sure that your motors are actually going to rotate in the right direction. It's just easy to do it with the DT7 because it kind of eliminates all the sort of programming of the menus. So if you look out for that video, I'll get that one done as soon as I can. And once we've of course got all the radio etc set up and we're absolutely sure the model is working 100%, we will then put all these screws in. So obviously if you have left them out, remember not to fly it out, otherwise you'll get a bit of twist in the arms. Now another thing that I haven't done, you might have noticed, is I haven't fitted on the optional extended undercarriage because these actually go into there. The reason why I don't tend to put this on when I'm building the model is, well, it's choice. Some people like the sort of low flat sporty look, but as I said before, if you're going to be fitting a gimbal on, it's good to actually just get it off the ground. These come, they don't normally come with the Flamewheel, but we include them in all our packages free of charge. But if you have got a Flamewheel and you want to get a set of these undercarriages, you can buy them from either our eBay shop or our proper website. I'll post all the links in the comment section. But basically once you've got it all assembled and you're ready to rock, to fit these arms on, you just have to remove these screws again, and then the arm basically will just come out there. So if you look out for the part 2 of this video, I'll get it done as soon as I can, as well as I'll be bringing out a lot more other videos because we do an awful lot with the shop. We do an awful lot of conversions and building for customers. We do a lot of retrofitting to the Phantoms etc, and this involves an awful lot of taking the Phantom apart, putting custom cabling in and all sorts of setups. So although we've been doing all this for years already, it's probably a good idea that I'll just show you how to do it, and it just makes life a little bit easier, because when we got started we did exactly the same thing. We hunted the internet, we found videos to show us how to build stuff. So by doing all these videos, it's just basically a way of basically putting a little bit back in. I will leave you to your build. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you find it helpful. And as I say, look out for part 2.